Have you ever felt like you're lost in the noise, as if life is rushing around you and nothing makes sense? The world is loud, filled with distractions, and sometimes it feels like no one is listening. But deep within, there's a question that might have crossed your mind. Is God still working in my life? And what if I told you that in the midst of the silence, God is speaking louder than ever? What if I told you that the very silence you're experiencing is actually a sign of His deepest work in you? Silence can feel unsettling. We live in a world that constantly demands our attention, from the flashing screens to the buzzing notifications. The constant noise can easily drown out the whispers of something greater. But sometimes, in the quiet moments, God is doing His most profound work in our lives. It's not always in the loud, dramatic experiences that we encounter Him, but often in the stillness where His presence is felt most strongly. Maybe you're waiting for a sign. Maybe you're praying for something to happen, some grand revelation or dramatic moment that will finally give you clarity. You're looking for answers in all the wrong places, thinking that they must come in the form of something bold, something unmistakable. But what if the answer you're seeking is already present, quietly unfolding right where you are? In the very silence that surrounds you, this is where faith comes in, trusting that even when things feel quiet, God is still present. The silence isn't a sign of absence, it's a sign of His presence working in ways you can't yet comprehend. It's in those moments of stillness that He is shaping you, refining you, preparing you for what's to come. And the question isn't whether God is working, it's whether you are paying attention to His work. Have you noticed the subtle ways He moves? The quiet nudges in your heart, the sudden peace that floods your soul when you least expect it? If you're willing to pause and look deeper, you'll find that God's work is all around you. He's not absent. He's not silent. He's waiting for you to slow down long enough to hear His voice, to feel His presence. I want to invite you to truly engage with this message. Take a moment to quiet your heart. I'm asking you to step into this experience fully because God is speaking to you right now. If you feel that something is stirring within you, that this message is for you, then I encourage you to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment below, "I'm hearing His voice." Not only will that be a declaration of faith, but it will also ignite something powerful within you and those around you. By commenting, you're joining a spiritual movement, helping to spread this message to others who are also waiting for a touch from God. This moment is sacred. You're not here by accident. God has brought you here to hear this message. You are part of something bigger, a journey of faith that connects us all. So lean into the silence, pay attention to the whispers, and let's discover together how God is working in ways we may not even see yet. The silence you're experiencing is not a void, it is a canvas. And on that canvas, God is painting a masterpiece. Now take a deep breath. Let this truth sink in. God is working in silence. Are you paying attention? You've just begun a journey, and what's coming next will transform the way you view the quiet moments of your life. Stick with me, and let's uncover the depths of God's work in the stillness together. It's easy to overlook the small moments. We're so caught up in the busyness of life that we miss the subtle signs of God's presence. We often think that if God is going to move in our lives, it has to be something grand, something visible. But what if I told you that God is working in the quiet moments, in the spaces where the world isn't looking? Consider the story of Elijah. In 1 Kings 19, Elijah is fleeing for his life, worn out and discouraged. He goes to a cave on Mount Horeb, feeling completely alone, desperate for a sign from God. He expects a great wind, an earthquake, or a fire, something powerful and dramatic. But God wasn't in any of those. Instead, God speaks to Elijah in a gentle whisper. This moment is crucial. God didn't need to shout over the noise of Elijah's fears or overwhelm him with a dramatic display. God chose to speak in the stillness, in a moment of quiet. Elijah's strength wasn't found in the noise of the storm, but in the quiet voice that he had to tune his heart to hear. How often do we wait for God in the loud moments of life? We pray for signs in our big moments of pain or uncertainty, thinking that a loud voice from heaven will suddenly bring clarity. But just as Elijah discovered, God doesn't always work through the loudest events. Sometimes he whispers, and we have to be still enough to hear it. Think about your life right now. What has God been whispering to you? Maybe you've been waiting for a loud miracle, but you haven't recognized the smaller, quieter ways He's been guiding you. Perhaps He's already spoken to you in the calm of your heart, but you've been too distracted to listen. In the quiet, God is nurturing a deeper connection with you. He's inviting you to draw near, not in the chaos of your life, but in the peaceful moments where He can speak directly to your soul. Sometimes it's in the quiet stillness of the morning, or during a walk when you're away from the noise, that you'll hear His voice the clearest. The question I want you to reflect on is, how often do you make space for silence in your life to hear God? Are you willing to let go of the noise and distractions, even for a moment, so that you can hear His voice? In those still moments, God is working, and He's waiting for you to tune in. The secret to hearing His voice lies in the quiet, but it requires intention. It requires the ability to silence the external world, and sometimes even the internal noise, to make room for His whisper. Are you ready to give Him that space? Are you willing to embrace the silence and trust that in those moments He's working in ways you might not understand yet, but that will lead you exactly where you need to go? Stay with me, because what's coming next will help you understand how God's silence can be the key to unlocking the next season of your life. Have you ever felt like God was silent in your life? Like your prayers were bouncing off the ceiling and you couldn't hear an answer, no matter how hard you tried? If you've been there, you're not alone. In fact, many of the great men and women of the Bible have gone through seasons of silence, and yet those are the very times when God was doing some of His most profound work. Take, for instance, the story of Joseph. In Genesis, we learn about Joseph's dreams and his great destiny. But soon after, his life takes a dark turn. He's sold into slavery, thrown into prison, and forgotten by those he helped. For years, Joseph seems to be in the midst of silence. No immediate answers, no miraculous intervention. But the entire time, God was at work, setting things up for a greater purpose. Joseph didn't see it at the time, but everything he went through was preparing him for something bigger than he could imagine. The silence wasn't a sign that God had forgotten him. It was a sign that God was working behind the scenes, weaving together the threads of His future. You might feel like Joseph today, like you've been in a holding pattern, waiting for something to change, waiting for God to move. But just like Joseph, you are not forgotten. God is working in the silence. He's shaping your character, preparing your heart, and positioning you for the moment when everything will align perfectly. This is the part of the journey where trust becomes crucial. When God is silent, it doesn't mean He's absent. It means that He is working in a way that is beyond what we can understand in the moment. It means He's doing the deep work of refining you, strengthening your faith, and preparing you for the breakthrough you've been waiting for. Let me ask you, have you been able to trust God in your seasons of silence? When nothing seems to be happening, do you still believe that God is in control and that He's working things out for your good? Joseph's story reminds us that even in the quiet, God is moving. He is working in ways that we can't always see, and just like with Joseph, when the time is right, everything will fall into place. Reflect on this. God's silence isn't the end of the story. It's just the beginning of something greater. Are you willing to wait in faith, knowing that the silent moments are part of God's perfect plan for your life? As you wait, trust that God is preparing you for what's next. Stay in the silence a little longer. You'll soon see that this season was never wasted. God's work in the silence is the foundation for the breakthrough that's coming. Stay with me, because there's more to discover. The silence you're experiencing today could be the very key to the next chapter of your spiritual journey. There's something powerful that happens when we begin to understand that silence is not a sign of abandonment, but a divine preparation. And when we're able to shift our perspective on God's silence, we find ourselves growing in ways we never imagined possible. Consider the prophet Elijah. In 1 Kings 19, we read about a moment when Elijah was at his lowest, running away from Queen Jezebel after a mighty victory over the prophets of Baal. He felt alone, isolated and discouraged. His soul was heavy with despair, and he sought refuge in a cave. That's when God showed up, but not in the way Elijah expected. First, there was a mighty wind, tearing the mountains apart. Then, an earthquake shook the ground. Finally, a fire raged, yet God wasn't in any of these powerful displays of nature. It was in the gentle whisper, the still small voice, that Elijah encountered God. This story teaches us something profound. Sometimes God speaks to us in the quietest of ways, in the moments when we least expect it. His silence is not his absence. It's an invitation to listen more intently, to open our hearts to the whispers that are easy to miss when we're distracted by the noise of our lives. Elijah's experience reveals a deep truth, that in moments of silence, we often encounter God in the most personal and intimate ways. The great wind, the earthquake, the fire, those might be the things we look for when we pray. We want the loud, dramatic signs, the clear answers that come with certainty. But God often works in subtler ways, speaking to us in the quiet of our hearts. How many times have you been waiting for a loud, obvious answer, only to miss the quiet whisper that was meant for you? It's easy to get caught up in the expectations of how we think God should act. We often want the dramatic, the immediate. But when we begin to recognize the stillness, we begin to see that God's presence is often found there in ways that draw us closer to Him. Reflect on your own life. Are you listening for God in the quiet moments? Can you hear the still, small voice that speaks in the midst of your waiting, in the silence you're experiencing? Elijah's encounter with God in the silence reminds us that there is something deeply transformative about learning to tune our ears to the whisper of the Holy Spirit. It's in the quiet that we are invited to slow down, reflect, and let God speak to us on a deeper level. And sometimes it's only in the quiet that we're ready to hear the message He's been sending. Remember, silence doesn't mean God is absent. It's in the silence that God does some of His most intimate and powerful work in our hearts. He's not just absent, He's refining you. And when you begin to hear His whispers, you'll realize that everything that seemed silent was in fact His divine way of preparing you for what's next. There's a deep spiritual insight that many of us overlook in our rush for answers. Sometimes silence is the very space where God does His deepest work. And the most remarkable thing is that this work often begins within us, in the depths of our own hearts. Consider the journey of David, a man after God's own heart. David spent much of his life in the wilderness, alone with God. His time as a shepherd was a time of quiet solitude, where he learned to rely fully on God. It was in those moments of silence that David's faith was deepened and strengthened. Psalm 23 gives us a glimpse into David's understanding of God's presence. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul." David knew that in the stillness of life's most quiet moments, he could find restoration and peace. God was present with him in those moments, even though there was no noise, no rushing, no outward signs of activity. But the truth is that most of us struggle with silence. We're conditioned to believe that silence equals emptiness, and so we fear it. We fill our lives with noise, distractions, and the endless pursuit of something bigger, louder, and more dramatic. But in the quiet, God works in a way that is often unseen and unheard. He's shaping us, refining us, and preparing us for the future He has planned for us. Reflect on your own life. How have you filled the silence with distractions? Have you missed the opportunity to hear God's voice because you've been so busy searching for something louder, more immediate? What if I told you that it's in the moments of silence, when everything feels still, that God is working most powerfully in your life? It's in those moments that God is healing wounds, strengthening your spirit, and teaching you to trust Him more deeply. We may not always feel it in the moment, but the silence is a holy space where God works to bring out the best in us. The next time you find yourself in a moment of quiet, instead of filling it with noise, take a deep breath and listen. Listen for the quiet whispers of God. Listen for the peace that passes all understanding. You may find that it is in that moment of silence that you hear Him most clearly. God is working in silence, but are you paying attention to what He's doing in the quiet spaces of your life? What if He's preparing you for something greater, something you can't see right now? Embrace the silence. It's in these moments that God's voice becomes clearer, His presence more real, and His work in you more profound. You may not hear the thunder, but that doesn't mean He's not speaking. The silence in our lives is often misunderstood. We have been conditioned to think that silence is something to be avoided. It's uncomfortable, unsettling, and it can even make us feel disconnected. But what if I told you that God doesn't need loud, dramatic moments to make His presence known? What if in the silence, He's whispering the most profound truths? We often associate God's work with powerful displays of His glory, miracles, signs, and wonders that take place in the midst of noise and chaos. However, throughout Scripture, we see God working in subtle, quiet ways. He is not confined to loud displays of power. The prophet Elijah's encounter with God is a perfect example. In 1 Kings 19:11-12, Elijah is instructed to go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord. There was a great wind that tore through the mountains, followed by an earthquake and a fire, but the Lord was not in any of these. Then after the fire, a still small voice, 1 Kings 19:12, spoke to Elijah. God's voice wasn't in the loud, chaotic events. It was in the silence. This isn't just a lesson for Elijah, it's a reminder for us as well. God doesn't need loud circumstances to speak to us. In fact, it is often in the quiet spaces of our lives that He speaks the loudest. The noise of the world drowns out His voice. But if we are intentional about creating space for silence, we will hear Him more clearly. How many times have we dismissed the quiet moments as insignificant? Maybe you've been waiting for a big, flashy sign from God, but what if He has been speaking to you all along, quietly in the background? What if the answers to your prayers, the comfort you've been seeking, and the guidance you long for are already present, just waiting for you to listen? Sometimes the hardest part of growing in our faith is learning to be still and listen. We are constantly bombarded with distractions, and we can easily forget that God often works through the gentle whisper of His Spirit. In the silence, God is teaching us to be patient, to trust, and to lean on Him without the need for constant affirmation. He is developing our character, strengthening our resolve, and drawing us closer to His heart. So when life feels still, when it seems like nothing is happening, take a moment to pause. In those moments, ask yourself, am I paying attention to the silence? Maybe, just maybe, God is inviting you into a deeper relationship, a place where you can hear Him more clearly. The silence is not empty. It is full of God's presence, waiting to be discovered. And if we're willing to tune in, we will find that God is working in ways we've never imagined. The most beautiful moments of our spiritual journeys may not come in loud, dramatic events, but in the quiet whisper of God's voice. Are you listening? Are you paying attention to what He's saying to you in the silence? When we think about God's work in silence, we often overlook the small, ordinary moments of our daily lives. The truth is, God is not just working during the high points or the big life-changing events. He's present in the mundane, the quiet, and the overlooked. But the question is, do we recognize it? Consider the story of Moses. God called him to lead the Israelites out of Egypt, a task that seemed impossible for a man who had been living as a shepherd in the wilderness for decades. Moses wasn't in the midst of a bustling city or surrounded by a community of people waiting for a savior. He was in silence, on the side of a mountain, tending to sheep when God called him through the burning bush. Exodus 3. The silence of Moses' life was broken by a voice that Moses almost missed because he was so caught up in the ordinariness of his work. In the silence, Moses encountered a life-changing moment. A moment that didn't come with the fanfare of crowds, armies, or fanfare. It came with the stillness of a desert and the fire of God's presence. In the same way, God is calling us to look beyond the noise of our lives. We often think we need to be in a certain place, around the right people, or in the middle of a big event to hear from God. But God's presence often manifests in the quiet, in the spaces we least expect. God spoke to Moses in the wilderness, a place that most would consider insignificant. Yet it was there, in that silence, that Moses received his purpose. God is not bound by our expectations. He doesn't need us to be in the right environment or mindset for His presence to show up. He can and will speak to us in places we least expect, in circumstances that seem ordinary or even discouraging. All He asks of us is to be present, to be still, and to listen. What does this mean for you? When was the last time you allowed yourself to sit quietly, away from the distractions, and let God speak to you in your everyday life? It's easy to overlook the small moments, the times when we're stuck in traffic or waiting in line at the store. But these are the times when God often meets us. He doesn't need us to be in a church service, at a retreat, or in a crisis for us to hear from Him. He is working in the silence of your day, even when you feel that nothing is happening. The challenge is to pay attention, to notice the gentle nudges of the Holy Spirit in your heart, the unexpected feelings of peace, or the clarity that comes when you quiet your mind and listen. God is often working behind the scenes, orchestrating the details of our lives in ways we don't always understand. But if we take a step back and open our hearts to the stillness, we will begin to see that He's been there all along, guiding us, whispering to us, and preparing us for what's next. Are you willing to pay attention to the quiet moments? Are you willing to believe that God is working, even when you don't see any outward signs? His silence is not absence. It is a call for us to slow down, listen, and trust in His perfect timing. The more we learn to embrace the silence, the more we will see the hand of God moving powerfully in our lives. As we continue to explore how God works in silence, we have to confront an important truth. It's not just about hearing His voice, but about trusting His presence even when we can't see His work. There is a deep spiritual lesson in this. God's silence is not abandonment. It's often a season of trust, a testing of our faith, and a reminder that His plans are beyond our understanding. Take the story of Job. He endured unimaginable suffering, yet throughout his trials, God was silent. Job was wrestling with the overwhelming questions of why he was suffering, and for a long time it seemed as though God had abandoned him. But in reality, God was there, even in His silence. He never left Job, but allowed him to walk through this painful journey to test his faith and refine his heart. Job's response during the silence reveals something deeply spiritual. He questioned, he lamented, and he even became frustrated with God's silence, but he never fully turned away from God. Job declared, "Though he slay me, yet will I trust in him." Job 13:15. Job didn't understand why he was going through this, but he trusted that God was still working, even in the silence. We too often find ourselves in seasons of silence, where it seems as though God is distant, or we're waiting for a breakthrough that never seems to come. In these moments we have a choice. We can choose to believe that God is still working behind the scenes, or we can let doubt and discouragement lead us away from Him. This is where the true test of faith happens, in the silence. It's in those moments when we feel alone, when we are waiting for answers or direction, that we have the opportunity to grow in trust. God's silence isn't a sign that He doesn't care. Rather, it's a sign that He's doing something profound in our hearts. Think about a seed being planted in the ground. It doesn't sprout overnight. For a time, it's buried in darkness, hidden from view. But beneath the surface, something is happening. The seed is growing, developing roots, and preparing to break through the soil in due time. In the same way, God's work in our lives is often hidden beneath the surface. We may not see the changes immediately, but trust that He's building something in us that will soon bloom. God's silence is an invitation to trust in His timing. It's easy to rely on our own understanding and impatience, especially when life is hard or unclear. But God calls us to rest in His perfect plan, knowing that His timing is always right. In Psalm 27:14, we are reminded, "Wait for the Lord. Be strong and take heart and wait for the Lord." Waiting doesn't mean doing nothing. It means trusting that God is working even when we can't see it. So if you are in a season of silence right now, take heart. God is still working. Your faith is being tested, but it is also being strengthened. This silence is not a sign of His absence, but an invitation to trust in His presence. How do you respond in silence? Do you feel abandoned, or do you choose to trust that God is still working even when you can't see it? Let this truth anchor you today. God is always at work, even in the quietest moments. He is shaping your life, preparing you for something greater, and His silence is a key part of that process. Can you trust Him in this moment, even without the answers? Can you rest in His perfect timing, knowing that He is working even when you can't see the results? The silence may be uncomfortable, but it is not empty. God is doing something in the hidden places of your heart, and soon you will see the fruit of His labor. As we continue this journey through the silence of God's work, we come to another powerful truth. God's silence often precedes a divine breakthrough. In the moments when we feel the weight of His absence, He is quietly preparing us for something that we cannot yet comprehend. It is in the stillness that God is setting the stage for His greatest works in our lives. But we have to stay alert, stay in faith, and most importantly, stay expectant. In the Bible, there's a beautiful example in the life of Mary, the mother of Jesus. After receiving the angel's message that she would conceive the Savior of the world, she entered into a period of silence. There was no immediate confirmation from her community, no sign from the world that this incredible thing was happening. For months, she carried a child who was to be the hope of humanity, but in the quiet, the world didn't see what was unfolding. But even in the silence, God was working. Mary's quiet obedience in those moments of waiting set the stage for the greatest miracle in human history, the birth of Jesus Christ. It was through the silence, through the waiting, that God prepared her for her pivotal role in salvation. History. We too can find ourselves in seasons where it feels like nothing is happening, where the promises God has given us seem to be dormant. But God is not idle. He is preparing us, shaping us, and refining us in the hidden places. When we feel like nothing is happening, it's often a sign that God is about to do something far greater than we can imagine. but we need to trust in the process, even when we can't see the outcome. Consider the story of Lazarus. When Jesus received word that Lazarus was ill, he didn't rush to him. In fact, he stayed where he was for 2 more days. By the time Jesus arrived, Lazarus had already been dead for 4 days. His sisters, Mary and Martha, were understandably confused and heartbroken, wondering why Jesus didn't come sooner. But Jesus knew something they didn't. His silence, his delay, was part of a greater plan. And when he called Lazarus out of the tomb, it was a miraculous display of his power and authority over death itself. Sometimes in our own lives it feels as though God has delayed, that he hasn't answered our prayers in the timing we expected. But we must remember, God's silence is not his absence. It is his preparation. It is his invitation to trust in the bigger picture he is weaving behind the scenes. When God remains silent, it's easy to become discouraged. But we must resist the urge to believe that nothing is happening. The truth is that God is at work, even when we can't perceive it. He is strengthening our faith, refining our character, and positioning us for his perfect timing. We are not forgotten in these silent moments. We are being prepared for something greater. Are you willing to trust that God is working even when you can't see the evidence? Will you believe that this silence is a precursor to the divine breakthrough he has promised? God is at work even in the quiet moments, and when the time is right, his power will be revealed in ways that exceed anything we could have expected. As you wait, remember, God's silence is not a denial of his promises. It is a part of his divine preparation. In the silence, he is doing something profound in your life. You may not see it yet, but trust that it's coming. His breakthrough is on the horizon. In what areas of your life do you need to trust that God is still working, even in silence? How can you stay faithful and expectant, even when it feels like nothing is happening? Reflect on these questions and let the silence become a space where you grow in trust, in faith, and in anticipation for what God is about to reveal. As we continue to delve into the silence of God's work in our lives, it becomes clear that God's silence is not something to fear, but rather something to embrace. It's easy to feel abandoned or forgotten when we are in the midst of quiet seasons. But in reality, God's silence can be one of the most powerful experiences of our spiritual journey. It is often in these quiet moments that God is refining us, preparing us for something far greater than we could imagine. There's a powerful lesson in the story of Elijah. After a series of dramatic events, including the confrontation with the prophets of Baal, Elijah found himself in a moment of deep despair. He fled to the wilderness, feeling isolated and abandoned. In this desolate place, God spoke to him, but not in the way Elijah might have expected. There was no mighty wind, no earthquake, no fire. Instead, God spoke to Elijah in a gentle whisper, 1 Kings 19:12. In that stillness, God revealed himself to Elijah in a way that was transformative, even though it didn't match the grandeur or immediacy Elijah was hoping for. This story serves as a profound reminder that God often speaks to us in ways that are subtle, quiet, and gentle. He is not always in the loud, dramatic moments, but in the quiet whispers of our hearts. It is in the silence that we can truly hear his voice, feel his presence, and understand his will for our lives. When we are in the midst of God's silence, it's easy to become disheartened, thinking that God is far away or indifferent to our struggles. But the truth is, God is closer than we think, and he is doing his deepest work in our hearts during these silent times. It's in these moments that our faith is tested and refined. Are we willing to wait on God's perfect timing? Are we willing to trust that he is working behind the scenes, even when we can't see it? The silence of God is an invitation to deeper intimacy with him. It's an opportunity to grow in trust and dependency, knowing that God's timing is perfect, even if it doesn't align with our expectations. His silence is not rejection. It is an invitation to draw nearer to him, to listen more closely, and to trust more fully. The silence is also a place of spiritual renewal. Just as the earth needs seasons of quiet and rest in order to bear fruit, so too do our souls. God's silence gives us space to reflect, to heal, and to prepare for what's ahead. It's in the quiet that we are often most vulnerable and most open to God's transformative work. He uses this time to shape us, to mold us, and to prepare us for the purpose He has ordained for our lives. But how do we respond to this silence? Do we sit in it with faith, knowing that God is at work? Or do we become anxious and restless, trying to fill the silence with our own noise and distractions? The key is to embrace the silence with faith, knowing that it is not an absence of God's presence, but rather a time of deep work in our hearts. It's in the stillness that we are being prepared for something greater. Reflect for a moment on the areas of your life where God may be inviting you into silence. What is He asking you to trust Him with? What are you learning in this quiet season? And how can you embrace the stillness with faith, knowing that God is working even when you can't see it? The silence of God is not something to fear. It is a place where transformation happens. In these quiet moments, God is shaping you, preparing you, and drawing you closer to Himself. He is working in ways you cannot see, but trust that His work is deep and powerful. Stay in faith, stay in expectation, and let the silence become a place of deep spiritual growth. In the quiet spaces of life, there's often a deep and profound truth that God is communicating even when we can't hear Him with our ears. Just as the seeds of a plant are growing underground where no one can see, God's work in our lives can often go unnoticed until it bursts forth into view. He is constantly at work, refining us, shaping us, and preparing us for the future. But how often do we miss His quiet whisper because we are too focused on our own noise and distractions? Think about the journey of the Israelites in the desert. After their miraculous escape from Egypt, they wandered for 40 years through a barren wilderness. They faced trials, confusion, and hardship, but in the midst of it all, God was working silently. His presence was there, even though they didn't always feel it. For much of their journey, they couldn't see the end of the road, and they didn't understand why they had to endure the silence and waiting. Yet God was preparing them. The silence wasn't a sign of His absence, but a sign of His care and love. The wilderness was a place of spiritual growth, a place where God tested their faith, taught them obedience, and taught them to rely solely on Him. It was in this silence that their faith was deepened and their relationship with God was transformed. You may be going through your own wilderness right now, a place of uncertainty, confusion, or silence. It might feel like God is distant or that nothing is happening in your life. But I encourage you to remember that silence does not mean absence. It simply means God is working in ways you cannot yet see. He is refining you, teaching you, and preparing you for something beyond what you could imagine. And just as the Israelites were eventually led into the promised land, God has a destination for you too. His silence is not a place of abandonment. It's a place of preparation. God is using this time to deepen your character, to teach you patience, and to refine your faith. He's working in your life in ways that may not be immediately visible, but trust that His plans are always good and His timing is perfect. Reflect on the moments of silence in your own life. Have you been able to see how God has used them to shape you, or have you been too focused on the waiting, thinking that nothing is happening? The truth is, God is always working. He's working in the background, preparing you, growing you, and refining you. Just as He was with the Israelites in the wilderness, He is with you in the silence, guiding you, teaching you, and leading you to the promises He has for your life. Sometimes it's in the silence that we learn to listen most attentively. When everything around us is quiet, it's easier to hear the gentle whisper of God's voice. It's in these moments that we can tune our hearts to His will and discover the deeper purposes He has for us. Don't rush through the silence, don't ignore it, and don't think that it's a sign of abandonment. Embrace it as a season of growth and transformation. God is working in the silence, and He is preparing you for what's next. Trust in His timing, trust in His methods, and trust that He is making all things beautiful in His time. And as you wait, remember that silence is not the absence of God's presence. It is often the space where His presence can be most profoundly felt. As we continue to reflect on the silence of God, it's important to understand that silence doesn't always feel comfortable or reassuring. In fact, it often challenges our faith, stretches our patience, and makes us question if God is really there. Yet this very silence is part of His greater plan for our lives. Just like a craftsman who carefully shapes and molds his creation, God uses silence to refine us and bring us closer to His purpose. Let's look at the example of Elijah, one of the greatest prophets in the Old Testament. In 1 Kings 19:11-12, Elijah, who had just experienced an incredible victory over the prophets of Baal, finds himself in a place of deep despair and fear. He runs to the wilderness, and there God tells him to stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord. But instead of the expected storm, earthquake, or fire, Elijah encounters a gentle whisper. God's presence came not in the grandiose displays of power, but in the stillness of a quiet voice. This passage speaks volumes about how God often works. We expect Him to show up in dramatic ways, to answer our prayers with thunder and lightning, to give us signs that are clear and undeniable. But instead, He often speaks in a whisper, in moments of stillness, and in the spaces between our distractions. God's silence is not a sign of His absence, but rather an invitation to listen more closely, to tune our hearts to His voice, and to trust in His timing. Elijah's experience teaches us that the presence of God is not always loud or overwhelming. Sometimes it is subtle, soft, and gentle. This can be difficult for us to accept, especially in a world that is full of noise, activity, and constant stimulation. We live in a time where we expect instant gratification, quick answers, and visible results. But God's silence is an opportunity to slow down, to pause, and to allow His presence to become our focus. In the quiet, we learn to discern His voice, to hear the whisper of His guidance, and to trust that He is working in ways we cannot see. Perhaps you're going through a season of silence right now. You've prayed, you've asked for guidance, and you've waited for God to reveal His plan, but all you hear is silence. It can be disheartening, and you may be tempted to think that God has forgotten you or that He's not paying attention. But let me assure you, God has not abandoned you. He is simply calling you to a deeper level of trust. He is inviting you to wait patiently, to rely on His timing, and to find peace in the quiet. In these moments of silence, you have the opportunity to reflect on what you truly believe. When there are no immediate answers, when there are no visible signs, do you still trust that God is with you? Do you believe that He is working even when you can't see it? The silence forces us to confront our faith and to lean into God in a way that we might not do if we had all the answers. It stretches us, refines us, and prepares us for what is to come. Just like Elijah, you may not always see or hear God in the ways you expect, but that doesn't mean He's not present. God is working in the silence, and He is preparing you for something greater. Trust in His presence, even when it feels like He's distant. Wait for His whisper, and when you hear it, respond with faith. He is moving in ways you cannot see, and He is preparing you for the next step in your journey. Take a moment to reflect on your own life. Are there areas where you are experiencing silence? Are you waiting for God to speak in a big, dramatic way? Maybe it's time to listen for His whisper in the stillness. God's silence is not a rejection. It's an invitation to trust, to listen, and to grow deeper in your faith. As we continue to dive deeper into the silence of God, it's crucial to remember that silence is never wasted time. We often view silence as a void, as a moment when nothing is happening. But in God's kingdom, silence is often the space where the deepest work occurs. It is in these quiet moments that our character is refined, our trust is deepened, and our dependence on God is strengthened. Think about the story of Job. In Job 30:20, we hear Job cry out, "I cry to you for help, and you do not answer me. I stand, and you only look at me." Job's words reflect the raw emotion many of us feel when we are in the midst of silence, feeling as though God is ignoring us or isn't hearing our cries. Job endured immense suffering, and in his pain, he longed for God's presence and answers. Yet for much of his journey, God remained silent. This silence wasn't a sign that God had abandoned Job, though. Instead, it was part of a greater process. God was allowing Job to wrestle with his faith, to face his doubts, and to confront his fears. Through this silence, Job's faith was purified. It wasn't easy, but by the end of his journey, Job's understanding of God's sovereignty was deeper and more intimate than it had ever been before. Job's silence became a space where God was molding his heart, refining his trust, and preparing him for the restoration that was to come. Like Job, we often experience silence when we are in the midst of hardship. It feels as though God is distant, as though our prayers are falling on deaf ears. But in these moments, God is doing a work within us that we cannot fully understand. The silence forces us to move beyond superficial faith and to seek a deeper, more intimate relationship with Him. It challenges us to move beyond our need for immediate answers and to embrace the mystery of God's timing and ways. In these moments of silence, God is also teaching us patience. In a world that demands instant results and quick gratification, patience can feel like an impossible virtue, yet God calls us to wait on Him, trusting that His timing is perfect. Psalm 27:14 says, "Wait for the Lord, be strong and take heart and wait for the Lord." This verse reminds us that there is strength in waiting, and that as we wait, God is working behind the scenes. Patience isn't passive. It's an active posture of trust, knowing that God is doing something in us and around us, even when we can't see it. God's silence also teaches us to live by faith, not by sight. 2 Corinthians 5:7 says, "For we live by faith, not by sight." Faith thrives in silence because it's in the quiet moments that we are forced to rely on what we cannot see or feel. It's easy to trust God when everything is going well, when we can see His hand at work in obvious ways. But true faith is built in the silence, when we cannot see or understand what God is doing. It's in these moments that we learn to trust, not in what we can perceive with our senses, but in the unseen promises of God. I encourage you to think about the times in your life when you have experienced God's silence. What did that silence teach you? Did it draw you closer to Him, or did it cause you to question His presence? Remember that God's silence is not His absence. Just because you can't see Him working doesn't mean He's not active in your life. He is refining your character, teaching you patience, and building your faith. When we look back, we often realize that the silent moments were the ones where God shaped us the most. As you reflect on your own spiritual journey, ask yourself this: how can I embrace the silence in my life? How can I allow this time of stillness to strengthen my faith and deepen my relationship with God? Instead of viewing silence as a void or a waste of time, try to see it as a sacred space where God is quietly working, molding, and preparing you for what lies ahead. Take a moment right now to sit in silence. Let go of any distractions. Let go of your need for immediate answers and simply be still before God. Allow the silence to become a space of trust, a space where you can hear His still, small voice. Trust that He is working, even when you can't see or feel it. And remember, God is never silent out of neglect. He is silent because He is shaping something beautiful in you. At this point in our journey, I want you to hear this with all of your heart. God's silence is never a sign of absence, but rather of presence in the deepest, most mysterious way. It's in these silent moments that God often reveals the most powerful truths. He isn't withholding Himself. He is preparing you for something greater, something that cannot be grasped in a rush or in noise. This is where the most profound shifts happen. Think of the prophet Elijah in 1 Kings 19:11-12. After Elijah had experienced the dramatic victories and defeats of his ministry, he fled into the wilderness, feeling broken, afraid, and abandoned. He needed to hear from God. The text says that God instructed him to stand on the mountain before the Lord, and there was a mighty wind, but God wasn't in the wind. Then there was an earthquake, but God wasn't in the earthquake. Then there was a fire, but God wasn't in the fire. But after all of these dramatic events, there was a gentle whisper. It was in that quiet moment that Elijah heard the voice of God. The lesson here is powerful. God often speaks in the stillness, in the quiet places of our lives, where there is no fanfare, no thunderous moments of revelation. The silence we experience isn't a void. It's a space where God's voice can be heard most clearly. In our fast-paced, noisy world, we often miss this whisper because we're so busy chasing after the big moments, the loud signs, the immediate answers. But God isn't bound to our expectations or our need for speed. His silence is often a call to slow down, to stop striving, and to listen. This principle isn't just found in the story of Elijah. It is woven throughout the Bible. When God called Samuel, the boy who would grow into a great prophet, it wasn't in a mighty display of power. It was in the silence of the night, as Samuel lay in his bed. In 1 Samuel 3:10 we read, "The Lord came and stood there calling as at the other times, 'Samuel, Samuel.'" Samuel's response was simple yet profound. "Speak, for your servant is listening." It was in the quiet, in the simplicity of the moment, that Samuel was called into a lifelong mission of hearing and speaking for God. In both of these stories, God's silence was not an absence, but a way of drawing His people closer, teaching them to listen beyond the noise of the world. He wasn't ignoring them or abandoning them. He was teaching them to hear His voice in the silence, to wait patiently for His word, and to trust that even in quiet moments, He is speaking. For many of us, this is where the tension lies. We live in a world that tells us to act quickly, to be busy, to fill every moment with sound, with activity, with distractions. We want answers, we want results, and we want them now. But the lesson of silence is that God's timing is perfect, and His work is not always immediate or obvious. Sometimes He needs us to wait, to sit in His presence, to learn to hear His whisper. This can be incredibly challenging, especially when we're going through seasons of uncertainty, pain, or confusion. In these moments, we may feel as though God is distant or silent. But His silence is not a punishment. It is a divine pause, a sacred space where He is doing something deeper in us, working on our character, building our trust, and refining our faith. It's in these quiet moments that we are transformed, shaped, and made ready for the next step in our journey. As you reflect on your life, ask yourself this: what is God trying to teach me in this season of silence? What is He preparing me for? What does He want me to hear in the stillness? Silence often invites us into deeper intimacy with God. When we cease striving, when we stop trying to control everything, we open ourselves to His presence. We stop filling the silence with our own thoughts and worries, and instead, we make room for God to speak. In those moments, we can trust that He is working, often in ways we don't yet understand, but in ways that will shape us for something greater. The silence is not the absence of God. It's the stage where His work is most profound. And when we lean into it, when we learn to embrace it, we position ourselves to hear the whisper of God that will guide us, heal us, and lead us into the fullness of His plan for our lives. God's silence is always preparing us for the next chapter, for the next season. It's in these quiet moments that we build the faith and trust needed to move forward. So, in the silence you are experiencing right now, know this: God is not distant. He is working, shaping, and guiding you, preparing you for what's to come. Trust Him in this silence and allow Him to do His deep work in your heart. You made it. You have journeyed through the silence, through the quiet moments where God's presence was hidden beneath the surface, but now it's clear. His work was always there. For those who stay until the end, who allow themselves to sit in the tension and the quiet, there's something powerful happening inside of you right now. This is the sacred space where transformation occurs. As we close this journey together, I want to honor you for being here, for listening to every word, for reflecting deeply, and for staying present even when the silence felt overwhelming. Few people make it this far, but those who do are part of something special, something sacred, a community of believers who are learning to hear God in the stillness. You are not alone in this walk. You are not forgotten. You are part of a greater story that is unfolding, and your willingness to embrace this journey has marked you. Now, I want to ask you to do something that may seem simple, but it's powerful. Comment below with the phrase, "I didn't leave because something held me here." It's not just words, it's a declaration of your commitment to listen for God's voice even when it's quiet. It's a declaration that you recognize His presence in the silence and that you are ready to step into the next chapter with faith, with trust, and with patience. By commenting, you are not only marking this moment for yourself, but you are also connecting with others who need this same reminder. God is always working, even in the silence. Together, we are building a community of people who are learning to hear His voice in the quiet, to trust His timing, and to rest in His presence. This is more than just a video, this is a movement of faith. Your comment is a way of saying, "I'm in this with you." And if this message resonated with you, I encourage you to share it with someone who might need it. There are people in your life who are going through seasons of silence right now, who feel abandoned, forgotten, or disconnected from God. This simple act of sharing could be the encouragement they need to hold on a little longer, to listen more intently for God's whisper, and to trust that He is working in their lives too. I want to say one final thing before we close. Subscribing to this channel is more than just a number. It's about being part of a living spiritual community. When you subscribe, you are joining a group of believers who are committed to growing, learning, and hearing God's voice in every season of life. This channel is a flame, and you are the oil that keeps it burning. Together, we are creating a space where God's presence can move and where His truth can spread. So, before you go, I want to invite you to stay in this moment for a few more seconds. Don't rush, don't leave immediately. Let the music play and allow your heart to be still before God. In the quiet, in the silence, allow Him to speak to you one last time. Listen for His voice. Surrender your worries, your fears, and your distractions. Let God work in this sacred space and be open to whatever He wants to reveal. May this moment be a turning point in your spiritual journey, a moment where you embrace the silence and hear the whisper of God's voice like never before. Take a deep breath, let it all go, and know that God is with you in the silence, working in ways you cannot yet see. Trust Him. He is always present, He is always working, and He is always speaking.